So thank you so much for your kind accepting the invitation for an interview on caleaeuropeana.ro. You, we, we are sure that you represent an important part of the history of the journalism and the way that maybe better than anyone else how the eastern part of Europe developed and the way that we are now together with Asia and in this special place called Kazakhstan. So, what do you think about the way that Europe took her steps in the past 50 years?
Well, it's a very interesting question because I've seen it at various stages. I was a correspondent in Brussels in 1988 and 89. It was the time of all the changes in Eastern Europe, so I saw those changes from the West European point of view, both economic and political, and that was extraordinary. Also, I had seen how it used to be in Eastern Europe because I was a correspondent in Moscow for 5 years in communist times, in Brezhnev's time, from 77 until 82. So I knew exactly how far Eastern Europe needed to come to reach the kind of level of freedom and authority and experience and know-how that was already taken for granted in Western Europe. I think that all of the continent has come a long way. It's been a joining together of two cultures or two parts of the continent that were separated by force after the Second World War. And I think now any younger person more or less takes it for granted that Europe is one continent with one kind of aim and one ideal of prosperity and happiness, whereas 30 years ago it was two continents, Eastern Europe and Western Europe.
But is it a one-way road? Because some people say that it's not an irreversible process. So the peace and the prosperity in Europe couldn't be any more a fact. But us, the Europeans, should work more and to pay more attention to the peace and the prosperity now.
Well, I think there is a big danger that if prosperity gets stuck, if the Europeans cannot solve the problems with the single currency, and if unemployment and austerity measures create real social dissatisfaction, and particularly unemployment for young people, we will see severe danger to the stability and the prosperity, and indeed the democracy that we've taken for granted, especially in Western Europe. Look at what's happening in Greece, for example, where you see the rapid growth of the Golden Dawn, which is a far-right kind of fascist party, where there are all sorts of totalitarian ideas. You see tremendous anger among youth groups in Spain and France and places where they have very high unemployment of young people, and a disenchantment with the political leadership of Western Europe. Now, this could happen in the East and in the West. It depends really whether the economic situation shows some sign of improving or whether the long-term outlook is very gloomy. And I think leaders in both parts of Europe, well, in all of Europe really, should do much more to try to understand the dangers and make sure that they don't lead to political instability.
So you talked about the Cold War, who divided Europe in two parts, the western and the eastern part. Now the crisis seems to split into the Europe between north and the south. What do you think about it?
Well, that's very true, yes. The problem was that the south was always the poorer part of Europe. Economically, their situation was much less favorable than, for example, Scandinavia or Germany. They then had an almost artificially high rate of growth after the European Union was formed, when many southern countries came into the Union with tremendous opportunities for cheap money and for investment and to really stretch their opportunities. Unfortunately, they didn't take the kind of infrastructure measures that they should have taken, and also they didn't make the political reforms that were needed, for example, in the reducing bureaucracy or in fighting corruption in places such as Italy, where prosperity had masked the fact that the actual state didn't function very well. And now we find that the leadership of many southern countries is not strong enough to take the measures that are necessary. For example, in Greece, it's been known for a long, long time that there was a lot of patronage in the appointment of people to the civil service. People just got jobs there because their uncle or their cousin or somebody like that was a member of the civil service. Now, that's no way to run a modern democracy, and those reforms should have been made, but they weren't. And when the economic challenge comes, the political leadership in southern Europe, unfortunately, is not sufficiently robust to be able to find the answers. Northern Europe, particularly places like Scandinavia, which have had a great deal of prosperity and political stability for a very long time, are in a much better position to deal with this challenge.
Do you think that the next step, because I saw many opinions here in Astana, European leaders or economy analysts and professors saying that Germany should do something, and the South starting to push pressure step by step on Germany, Spain, Italy, maybe a little bit France. How long could resist Germany to such a pressure, and which do you think that will be the response?
Well, I think the Germans will be a little bit angry with these calls for them to do more, because the Germans say, after all, look at the amount of money we've already poured into the economies of southern Europe. Look how much the Germans have paid for Greece. And there is a very understandable feeling among ordinary German voters that why should the Greeks retire at a much earlier age, and why should they have such long holidays, and why should German taxpayers pay for that? If the Greeks want to live better, they should work harder. That's their view. On the other hand, it's perfectly true that Germany, of all countries, has had the most success and prosperity from the creation of the Eurozone. And the Eurozone, by definition, means that the weaker members will be an easy market for the stronger members. So German prosperity is a result of them having access to the markets of southern Europe, and to some extent they have exploited this prosperity for their own needs and their own ends. So they do have a responsibility, really, to help those countries that have suffered as a result of their lack of competitiveness. So I think if the Germans want their big single market to continue, they do have to do a lot more to pay for it, in the sense of probably permanent transfers of money to the poorer countries.
So do you think that after 50 years we will pay the same respect like we are paying now for Jean Monnet or Robert Schuman or some important leaders who are the fathers of the European project? I mean, looking to Rompuy, Barroso, Angela Merkel, Hollande, Sarkozy, their political level as a vision, is it at the same level as 50 years ago?
I don't think there's the same feeling of urgency to create a European Union, because the generation of Jean Monnet was the generation that had lived through the Second World War and even could remember the First World War, when Europe was devastated by political conflict and by fighting. That isn't the memory of young leaders now, and certainly not of the general public. So as a result, you are seeing people taking European unity more or less for granted. They don't see it as a great mission. They don't see it as a civilizing mission to bring Europe together. There's not the same passion attached to this idea. And therefore, people still feel much more attached now to their own home countries. They feel part of Europe, yes, but equally they feel that what matters is what their own governments do and how they respond to their own feelings in, say, France or Netherlands or wherever it may be. I mean, the Netherlands is a good example. This is a country that was one of the most European of all the founding members of the common market. Now you've seen a tremendous change in the mentality, where a lot of Dutch people are very angry at the way their own government has handled situations, especially things such as immigration, and where there is some resentment of the central powers in Brussels, a feeling of an unelected bureaucracy. So I think that the European leaders today, national leaders, do have to work quite hard to maintain enthusiasm for the European ideal.
Thank you so much.